It began with a slammed leather folder inside a private legal chamber at Clarence House. An explosive moment so abrupt that even veteran aides froze in stunned silence. Queen Camilla, usually composed behind her carefully perfected royal calm, reportedly rose from her chair and walked out without a word after discovering Prince Harry's remaining title access had quietly been stripped away. What started as a routine inheritance review suddenly became one of the most chilling royal confrontations of 2026. And insiders claimed the palace had been preparing for it for months. According to various interpretations circulating among royal insiders, the meeting had originally been described as procedural, another quiet legal consultation connected to succession planning during King Charles III's ongoing health struggles. But the atmosphere reportedly changed the moment a revised access memorandum was placed before the room. It was not merely about titles in the ceremonial sense. The documents allegedly addressed something far more sensitive inside the sacred geography of the British monarchy: institutional proximity. Who could enter certain royal estates without approval? Who retained private consultation privileges? Who still possessed symbolic pathways into the machinery of the crown itself? And perhaps most devastating of all, who no longer did? Sources close to palace administrative circles whisper that Prince Harry's remaining ceremonial access had existed in a fragile gray area ever since his departure from royal duties years earlier. Publicly, the palace maintained careful ambiguity. The language was always restrained, diplomatic, deliberately vague. But behind closed doors, different interpretations of ongoing legal reviews painted a much colder reality. Senior advisors reportedly feared that continued uncertainty surrounding Harry's standing inside the institution created vulnerabilities at a moment when the monarchy could least afford instability. King Charles III's illness had already forced private discussions about continuity, constitutional optics, and the future balance of power within the House of Windsor. And according to insiders familiar with the palace administrative streams, Prince William had increasingly pushed for clarity over sentiment. That was reportedly the context surrounding the confidential legal meeting at Clarence House. Privy Council lawyers, royal estate administrators, constitutional aides, and senior advisors allegedly gathered to finalize revisions tied to what insiders called access authority protocols. Certain ceremonial pathways connected to royal representation had quietly been narrowed over time, but reports suggest the latest revisions went further than expected. Invitations connected to institutional consultation, access permissions linked to royal residences, future representation rights during state-aligned ceremonies. Each adjustment appeared small on paper, yet together they formed something far more consequential: a silent dismantling of Harry's remaining operational connection to the monarchy. What reportedly stunned Queen Camilla was not simply the existence of the revisions, but the discovery that the process had already been approved before the meeting even began. Palace insiders claimed she believed discussions were still ongoing and that some level of compromise remained possible despite years of tension between Harry and the institution. Instead, she allegedly found herself confronted with completed legal recommendations supported by senior royal advisors who believed the matter had already reached its conclusion. Witnesses whisper that the realization hit the room like ice water. Camilla, long associated with maintaining delicate domestic diplomacy inside the palace walls, reportedly viewed the move as unnecessarily severe during Charles's weakened condition. Some accounts even suggest she accused certain aides of deliberately keeping her uninformed while the king focused on treatment and recovery. The emotional temperature inside the chamber allegedly became impossible to contain. One palace source later described the atmosphere as the closest thing to open warfare the old guard had witnessed in years. Even veteran courtiers reportedly avoided eye contact as tensions escalated behind closed doors. And then came the moment now whispered about across royal administrative offices: the sudden scrape of Camilla's chair against the floor, the sharp closing of the leather folder, and her abrupt exit before the meeting had formally concluded. No statement, no farewell, only stunned silence lingering behind her as aides reportedly sat frozen around the long polished table. 4 years, Prince Harry's royal status existed in a strange and fragile limbo, neither fully erased nor fully protected. But behind palace gates, insiders whispered that the monarchy had finally reached its breaking point. After the explosive confrontation inside Clarence House, the silence that followed reportedly masked something far more dangerous than public scandal. According to various interpretations circulating through royal administrative circles, the institution had spent years attempting to balance two realities that could no longer coexist. On one side stood bloodline, history, memory, and the emotional weight of a son who had once walked behind his mother's coffin beneath the eyes of the world. On the other stood the crown itself, an ancient institution now battling instability, illness, and growing fears about what unresolved royal tensions could mean during one of the most fragile periods of King Charles III's reign. Ever since stepping away from official duties in 2020, Harry's relationship with the monarchy reportedly existed within carefully controlled ambiguity. Publicly, the palace avoided definitive language. There were statements about love, reconciliation, and family bonds, but insiders claimed the machinery operating behind those polished words was far colder. Certain ceremonial pathways allegedly remained open because of Harry's birthright. Limited privileges connected to bloodline status reportedly survived even after the departure from working royal life. Invitations to select events, restricted forms of institutional consultation, symbolic access tied to legacy rather than responsibility. To the public, those details appeared insignificant. But within the sacred architecture of the monarchy, every title, every corridor, every level of access carried enormous constitutional meaning. And according to palace administrative sources, concerns surrounding those arrangements deepened with every passing year. The interviews, the memoir revelations, the public accusations, the legal disputes involving security and royal protections. Each controversy reportedly widened fears among senior courtiers who believed the monarchy was slowly losing control of its own boundaries. Different interpretations of internal meetings suggest some advisors viewed Harry's remaining institutional privileges as vulnerabilities waiting to erupt into larger constitutional headaches, particularly during Charles III's declining health. The idea of unresolved ambiguity reportedly became intolerable for members of the old guard who prioritized continuity above sentiment. Insiders whisper that Prince William emerged as one of the strongest voices demanding clarity. While public appearances remained measured and disciplined, sources close to palace operations claim William privately pushed for what aides described as clear constitutional boundaries regarding non-working royals. To his supporters, it was not personal revenge. It was institutional survival. Those familiar with the future kings thinking reportedly insist he viewed blurred royal roles as dangerous during a time when the monarchy already faced enormous pressure from political uncertainty, media scrutiny, and public skepticism. The crown, according to one whispered interpretation, could not function if symbolic authority and operational authority remained entangled. That belief allegedly triggered a far-reaching legal review behind closed doors. Advisors quietly began examining old agreements tied to titles, security structures, ceremonial representation, and future succession optics. Some documents reportedly dated back years, while others were revised repeatedly as tensions escalated between California and palace walls. What began as administrative housekeeping allegedly evolved into something much larger, a slow-motion restructuring of Harry's remaining connection to institutional royal life. And as Charles's health struggles intensified throughout 2025 and into 2026, the urgency surrounding those reviews reportedly became impossible to ignore. Yet not everyone inside the palace supported such a ruthless approach. Reports suggest Queen Camilla favored caution, fearing that excessive punishment could permanently destroy any remaining pathway toward reconciliation. Palace insiders claim factions quietly formed behind the scenes. Traditionalists pushed for firm separation and tighter control. Others believed preserving some bridge to Harry remained emotionally and politically necessary for Charles himself. The divisions reportedly grew sharper with every private meeting, every legal revision, and every carefully worded memorandum moving silently across royal desks. But while Camilla believed negotiations were still ongoing, another royal figure had already decided the time for compromise was over. According to royal insiders, the decision was not impulsive. It was calculated, surgical, and months in the making. An operation reportedly crafted with the precision of bureaucratic warfare. By the time Queen Camilla stormed out of the Clarence House meeting, sources whisper that the real machinery behind the decision had already been moving silently for nearly a year. What appeared publicly as a sudden tightening of royal protocol was, according to different interpretations from palace administrative circles, actually the final stage of a carefully coordinated institutional strategy. And at the center of that strategy, insiders claim, stood two figures who increasingly viewed themselves not simply as family members, but as guardians of the monarchy's future, Prince William and Princess Anne. Reports suggest the discussions began quietly during the worsening uncertainty surrounding King Charles III's health. The palace, already strained by constitutional pressures and growing public scrutiny, allegedly entered a period of intense internal evaluation. Certain advisors feared the monarchy was drifting into dangerous territory where emotional relationships and operational authority were becoming impossible to separate. According to insiders familiar with royal administrative streams, William became increasingly convinced that unresolved ambiguity surrounding Prince Harry's remaining privileges posed a long-term threat to institutional credibility. To supporters of the future king, the issue was never merely personal. It was structural. They reportedly believed the monarchy could not preserve authority while simultaneously allowing fragmented forms of royal participation to exist outside the discipline of official duty. Princess Anne, described by palace veterans as one of the last uncompromising defenders of the old guard, allegedly shared those concerns. Various interpretations of private meetings claim and viewed the situation through a colder, more institutional lens than many others surrounding the king. She had spent decades inside the machinery of the firm, watching how instability could quietly grow behind polished public statements. Sources close to former palace staff whisper that and feared emotional hesitation inside the family had already delayed difficult decisions for too long. And as Charles became increasingly exhausted by treatment schedules, constitutional briefings, and mounting internal tensions, Anne and William reportedly began coordinating more closely behind closed doors. That coordination allegedly evolved into what insiders later described as an iron protocol. The phrase itself reportedly circulated quietly through legal and administrative offices as a shorthand description for the monarchy's new approach toward operational boundaries. According to those familiar with the process, the objective was simple but devastating: separate bloodline from institutional privilege once and for all. Harry would remain a prince by birth, but the pathways connecting him to operational royal life would allegedly be narrowed, controlled, and gradually dismantled with surgical precision. The strategy did not happen all at once. That, according to insiders, was precisely what made it so effective. Invitations reportedly became more selective. Briefing rights connected to certain ceremonial matters allegedly disappeared quietly over time. Consultations involving state-adjacent appearances reportedly stopped arriving altogether. Some access permissions tied to royal estates were allegedly revised under broader security reviews, while other changes were folded into administrative restructuring connected to Charles's illness. To the outside world, nothing appeared dramatic. No public declaration, no explosive headline, just a slow and deliberate tightening of institutional walls around the monarchy itself. Palace administrative streams reportedly referred to the process as containment before transition. The phrase carried chilling implications inside royal circles. Containment meant limiting unpredictability before William's eventual reign. Transition meant preparing the monarchy for a future where operational loyalty would matter more than bloodline sentiment. And according to insiders, Queen Camilla remained almost entirely unaware of how advanced the process had become. While she reportedly believed discussions surrounding Harry's status were still fluid and negotiable, legal teams had allegedly already finalized key revisions tied to access authority, ceremonial privilege, and future representation protocols. By the time the Clarence House meeting convened, the real decisions had reportedly already been made. What remained was simply formal acknowledgement. But no amount of preparation could soften the emotional shock once the truth became unavoidable. The tension that had been building quietly behind palace walls for months reportedly exploded in a single unbearable instant inside Clarence House. According to insiders familiar with the meeting, the atmosphere had already become emotionally volatile by the time the final legal revisions were presented. But few in the room allegedly expected the reaction that followed. Veteran aides who had survived decades of royal crisis later whispered that they had never seen such a visible fracture inside the senior ranks of the monarchy during Charles III's reign. Because this was no longer simply about Prince Harry. It was about loyalty, influence, succession, and the terrifying realization that the balance of power inside the House of Windsor was beginning to shift in ways even Queen Camilla could no longer control. Reports suggest Camilla entered the meeting believing there was still room for compromise. Despite years of public conflict surrounding Harry and Meghan, insiders claimed she privately maintained the belief that bloodlines still mattered above all else within the monarchy. Titles could be reduced, public duties could disappear. But according to sources close to palace social circles, Camilla allegedly assumed some continuing institutional role for Harry would survive simply because he remained the king's son. To her supporters, preserving even symbolic pathways back into royal life represented stability rather than weakness. They feared total separation could permanently deepen divisions already threatening to fracture the family beyond repair. But the documents placed before the meeting reportedly revealed something far more severe than expected. Legal advisors allegedly confirmed that several remaining symbolic privileges connected to royal representation had now been formally restricted or eliminated altogether. Certain ceremonial consultation rights, limited institutional access connected to royal estates, internal briefing pathways tied to official royal functions. None of it sounded dramatic to outsiders. Yet within palace walls, those privileges reportedly represented the final threads connecting Harry to operational royal life. And according to insiders, the realization hit Camilla with devastating force. Sources whispered that the Queen Consort immediately challenged several senior aides, accusing them of weaponizing protocol while King Charles III remained physically weakened by illness. Different interpretations of the confrontation suggest her anger was not only directed at the decision itself, but at the secrecy surrounding it. Some accounts claim she believed key discussions had deliberately bypassed her influence network entirely. Others insist she was furious that institutional hardliners had accelerated the process while Charles struggled privately with exhaustion, treatment schedules, and mounting emotional strain. Whatever the exact truth, palace insiders agree on one thing. The emotional atmosphere inside the room reportedly became unbearable. And at the center of it all sat King Charles III himself. Witnesses described the monarch as visibly drained throughout the meeting, torn between personal heartbreak and institutional duty. Sources close to palace administrative circles claimed Charles spoke very little as tensions escalated around him. Some insiders believe he understood the necessity of the legal revisions but struggled emotionally with the consequences. Others whisper he simply lacked the strength to stop the machinery already moving around him. Legal advisors allegedly defended the revisions with cold precision. They reportedly insisted the measures were essential to secure long-term institutional clarity during an increasingly fragile period for the crown. To the architects of the so-called Iron Protocol, this was not punishment. It was structural preservation. Yet the human cost of that strategy now stood fully exposed in front of everyone present. Palace staff later described the atmosphere after Camilla's exit as ice-cold, with several aides reportedly terrified that details of the confrontation could leak beyond the walls of Clarence House. Because what had unfolded was larger than a private disagreement. Insiders claim the moment exposed growing fractures between Camilla's remaining influence network and the future leadership circle quietly forming around Prince William. And once those fractures became visible, the crisis inside the monarchy could no longer remain contained behind closed doors. In the hours after Queen Camilla's dramatic exit from Clarence House, whispers reportedly spread through palace corridors with unusual speed. What many first dismissed as another isolated family rupture suddenly began taking on a far more chilling interpretation. According to royal commentators and administrative insiders, the confrontation was not simply about Prince Harry's remaining privileges. It was about the future identity of the monarchy itself. Because behind the scenes, sources claim Prince William had already begun shaping a royal philosophy very different from the softer emotional balancing acts that defined much of King Charles III's reign. Royal observers increasingly describe William as deeply focused on constructing what insiders call a streamlined monarchy, one built not around emotional accommodation, but around operational loyalty, institutional clarity, and rigid constitutional discipline. Those familiar with internal palace discussions claim the future king has grown increasingly convinced that the survival of the crown depends on shrinking the gray zones that once allowed tensions to quietly fester beneath the surface. To William's allies, the monarchy could no longer afford blurred boundaries between working royals and estranged family members living outside the institution. Every unresolved relationship, every symbolic privilege, every half-maintained royal pathway reportedly carried the risk of future instability during an era already filled with uncertainty. That belief, according to palace insiders, is now beginning to reshape the entire internal structure of the firm. Reports suggest non-working royals may face even further reductions in ceremonial influence moving forward. Invitations once extended automatically could become conditional. Institutional access once preserved out of tradition may now depend entirely on operational commitment to the crown. Sources close to administrative staff claim the philosophy emerging around William is brutally simple. Duty must outweigh sentiment if the monarchy hopes to survive the modern age. And nowhere was that philosophy more visible than in the tightening restrictions surrounding Prince Harry. Courtiers reportedly viewed Harry's restricted access as more than an isolated disciplinary measure. To many inside the old guard, it became a symbolic warning directed at future royal dissenters. The message, according to one whispered interpretation, was unmistakable. Royal blood alone would no longer guarantee institutional privilege. Those who stepped outside the operational structure of the monarchy could not continue orbiting its inner machinery indefinitely. It was a principal princess and allegedly supported with fierce determination. Long respected inside palace walls for her uncompromising work ethic and institutional discipline, and reportedly viewed operational clarity as essential during a time of deep vulnerability for the crown. Sources close to former staff claimed she privately feared emotional hesitation had already weakened the monarchy for too long. At the center of this emerging philosophy stood a phrase now quietly repeated through royal administrative circles: duty over personal grievance. Palace insiders describe it as the moral foundation of William's future leadership approach. Not revenge, not cruelty, but structure, stability, survival. Throughout the growing turmoil, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reportedly seen by insiders as a stabilizing presence beside William. Sources suggest she remained quietly supportive of efforts to preserve institutional order while Charles battled ongoing health struggles behind palace walls. Unlike the public turbulence surrounding other royal relationships, William and Catherine allegedly presented a united internal front focused almost entirely on continuity and long-term stability. To their supporters, they represented the future architecture of the monarchy itself, measured, disciplined, and emotionally restrained even during crisis. But not everyone inside royal circles viewed the shift with confidence. Camilla's allies reportedly feared her influence could weaken significantly under a future William reign, shaped by tighter operational control and shrinking informal power networks. Some insiders even whispered that the Clarence House confrontation exposed the beginning of a larger internal realignment already underway. Royal commentators quietly began referring to it as the new order inside Windsor circles, a colder, more disciplined era where institutional survival would matter more than family accommodation. Harry had once represented the monarchy's modern future alongside Prince William, a younger generation capable of restoring emotional connection between the crown and the public after decades of institutional turbulence. Together, they were once viewed as inseparable figures standing at the center of the royal family's next chapter. But somewhere between grief, public conflict, fractured trust, and years of escalating tension, the foundation holding that future together reportedly collapsed beyond repair. Inside palace walls, sources whisper that Harry's relationship with senior royal structures has now reached its lowest point since his departure from official duties. What once existed as uneasy distance has allegedly hardened into institutional separation. Following the legal reviews tied to access authority and ceremonial privileges, certain royal channels reportedly became inaccessible altogether. Invitations connected to internal consultation allegedly vanished. Representation pathways tied to ceremonial matters reportedly narrowed to almost nothing. And according to palace insiders, those changes were not viewed internally as temporary disciplinary measures. Royal staff allegedly described the restrictions in chillingly final terms. Institutional finality, a phrase that quietly spread through administrative offices after the Clarence House confrontat. That phrase carried enormous emotional weight because it suggested something deeper than punishment. It implied permanence. Sources close to the firm claim years of public interviews, memoir disclosures, legal battles, and ongoing tensions had gradually eroded trust inside the institution beyond the point of recovery. To many senior courtiers, the issue was no longer whether reconciliation was emotionally desirable. It was whether the monarchy itself could continue functioning while uncertainty surrounding Harry's role remained unresolved. According to various interpretations circulating among palace staff, confidence inside the institution had been weakened repeatedly by fears of unpredictability, media exposure, and divided loyalties. Over time, those fears allegedly transformed private caution into quiet institutional withdrawal. Yet behind the constitutional language and legal revisions, insiders insist the emotional consequences for King Charles III have been devastating. Commentators close to royal circles increasingly describe the situation as one of the deepest private heartbreaks of Charles's reign. The king, already battling exhaustion and ongoing health struggles, reportedly found himself trapped between two impossible forces: the emotional instinct of a father and the unforgiving demands of the crown. Some insiders believe Charles resisted harsher measures for years precisely because he feared the finality now unfolding around him. Others whisper he understood the direction the monarchy was heading but lacked the strength to stop the machinery once it began accelerating around William and Anne's institutional strategy. Queen Camilla reportedly shared some of those fears. Sources suggest she became increasingly alarmed that the palace was pushing Harry too far from any future path back toward reconciliation. To her supporters, preserving symbolic connections mattered because they represented the last fragile threads holding family together beneath the institution itself. But allies close to Prince William allegedly viewed the situation through a completely different lens. According to insiders, they believed clarity, however painful, was necessary to preserve the monarchy's long-term stability. In their view, unresolved ambiguity had already weakened the crown for too long. The emotional suffering surrounding the decision was tragic, but instability inside the institution was considered even more dangerous. The monarchy reportedly entered a period of profound internal anxiety during King Charles III's declining health. Sources close to royal operations claim advisors